Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Manuel, and today we're going to be learning about the MVVM. Alright, and in our last video we learned about the MVC, so if you haven't watched that, then maybe just take a few moments and just go watch that. Alright, so what is MVVM? The first letter stands for model, and just like we said in our last video, this basically represents our data. So a typical example is having a user object that basically describes the various attributes that a user has. So like a first name, a last name, an email, and also certain actions that the user can perform. So for example, we could have a method in our user model called save user or update user name, something like that, you know. So that's what our model is about, right? Now, the second one we have is the view, and very simple, as the view says, whatever we can see. All right, so our buttons, our texts, fields, our switch controls, whatever objects you can see on the screen, right? That's what our view is about. And finally, unlike the MVC, we have something called the view model. And just like the name implies, view and model, so it basically means a model for a specific view. So if you remember from our MVC, we had a user object with all of the user attributes, right? And a view, or all different views that are available in the app, has access to all of the user objects, right? But for a view model, or for the view model design pattern, every view has its own view model. And basically what the view model is all of the attributes or all of the methods that are directly related to the view itself. So it's not going to have all possible attributes that an object has, but it's going to only contain attributes that are specific to a particular view. All right, we're going to see exactly what this means in a bit. But just to give like a general picture, imagine that we had a user object with first name, last name, email, phone number, and some other extra fields, location and the likes. Now, if we have a table view cell, for example, where we only display the first name and the last name, for the MVC, we would have access to all of these attributes I just mentioned for the user. But for the view model, we're only going to have access to the first name and the last name. And with that, if let's say, for example, some changes were made to maybe the email or whatever, just changes are made to the model in general, the view is not going to be aware of this, and you wouldn't have to make any changes whatsoever to the view because the view has absolutely no idea what is happening with the model. All right, so we're going to actually see this in action, so don't worry too much if you didn't really understand what I said. Now, before we actually get into code, I'd like to just give sort of an overview of just how these connect with themselves. All right, so again, we have our model, our view, we have our view model. Right? So let's say a user performs an action, the view model is going to be aware. So the view model, you can think of, contains our business logic. So now that the view model is aware, it's going to perform whatever kind of logic is required for that particular data. So let's say, for example, you want to do a login, or you want to get some data from your storage or whatever. The view model does that. All right. Then when it is done, it basically updates our view. But now, unlike our MVC, the update isn't done directly. It's done using a binder, if you will. And basically what this means is that the view model is not aware of the view. Now, remember from the view, the MVC we had in our last video, whenever changes are made or whenever the view needs to be updated, the controller directly modifies the view. So the controller is aware of the various objects, the various attributes that are available in the view. Now this is different for the MVVM, because in the MVVM, the view model performs whatever operations, and when it is done, it updates a value in the view model. Now when this value is updated, it sort of sends a broadcast or a notification, if you will, that this particular object has been changed. Now, when this update or this notification is sent out, whatever views are connected or bound to that object, all of those views that are bound are going to be notified. Then the moment they are notified, then they can, of course, directly update their view. So just to give a general flow, imagine that we're trying to get a logged in user, for example. The view model goes and gets the logged in user from maybe the local storage, and when it's done, it just updates the user object. And when it updates the user object, that's all. The view model doesn't do anything else. It just updates the user model within its class or its scope. Now, when it does that, somehow behind the scene, the view controller, because in UIKit we have like a view controller, but the view, right, is going to be aware automatically that the view model's object has been changed. And because it is aware, it will now update the label and then change the maybe name or whatever property. All right. Now don't be so bothered about how this works. We're definitely going to go into code and I'm going to see how this works in action. It's pretty interesting. Don't worry. So yeah, that's how the view and the view model connect with themselves. So the view, just to stress the point, the view is aware of the view model, but the view model is not aware of the view. So whenever the view model makes changes, or whenever changes are made to the view model, the view is going to be aware. So if you change some objects or whatever values, some properties in your view model, your view is going to be aware. But if you change properties in your view model is not going to be aware. It's not going to care because it doesn't speak to the view model directly. All right. So just imagine that you make some changes and you just shout. I don't care who listens. I just shout, hey, I've changed. So whoever is in the background can listen and do whatever they want to do. You don't care whether or not they react. All right. That's how the view model is. It is completely independent, but the view has to be aware of the view model so that whenever changes are made, the view can update. It seems like I've spent a lot of time explaining this, but I just hope that makes sense. So yeah, the same way the view model also connects with the model. So just like the view is aware of changes in the view model is aware of changes in the model. So the view model is sort of in between the view and the model. And what this does is whenever, so there are two things involved. In the view model, only objects or only attributes that the view needs are available. So just like if you remember from the initial example I gave, if you have like a user object, the user object can have like 50 different attributes, but the view model is going to have just two, the first name and the last name. All right. So the view model gets that data from the model. So it connects with the model and is able to update the value of the model or even retrieve values from the model. All right. So that's how it works. And again, the model can notify the view model if changes are made in the model. Okay, so I think I've spent some time explaining how the entire the model view and view model connect with themselves. So let's actually go into code, and I'm sure everything is going to make sense to you very shortly. All right. So I'm just going to open up the starter project, and this is actually the same starter project that we had in our last video, and I'm going to leave a link in the description. So if you want to follow along, then just feel free to download the starter project and we can move along. Otherwise, you can also just watch and learn, because the idea of this is to give you a visual understanding of how you could write your MVVM code. Okay. Now, before I actually go into the implementation, I'd like to just do a very quick run through of the code base, just in case you don't want to go check the previous video. So, but basically, if you open the main.storyboard, we have two view controllers, as you may consider as our view in our MVVM. All right. So our view, we have our login screen and we have our home screen, which basically simulates a like the landing page of a logged in user. All right. So here we have our email and password, and when you click on this button, we want to go to the next page and then want to show hello and then the full name of the user. All right. So if you go over to the login view controller, you're going to see that we have the email and password connected. We have a button, a function here that's executed whenever the login button is clicked. Then this touches began. So we can resign the keyboard when you click on the body of the screen. All right. So if you go to the home view controller, we have nothing serious going on here. We just have a reference to our welcome label, which is that hello welcome label in the middle of the screen. So this is where we're gonna set the name of the user. All right. So now we have our view all set up. The next thing we want to do, and sorry, before I just go any further, when we're talking about MVVM, some people ask the question, okay, but I still see a controller. Yes, you do, because in UIKit, we basically have our view and our controller basically tangled into a view controller, all right? But just imagine that as your view, right? Then we have our view model, then we have our model, okay? So let's go ahead and implement our view. So just quite similar to our last video, we're going to create a struct, and this struct is going to be called user. All right, so this is going to be our model. So how do we create our user model? Very simple, just say user, and we're going to create a couple of attributes. So we're going to have first name, we're going to have last name, we're going to have age. Age is going to be an integer. What am I doing here? Then let's add email. I think we're just going to stop over here. All right. So this is our user object. And again, user objects can be really crazy. Like it could be so long. Imagine if you have, if you're working on an actual code base, like a big project, the user object can be really long. So this is why the view model can actually be really helpful, because out of like 30 different attributes, I only need 2. So why do I need access to all of them? All right. So this is our model. Okay, so for the view model, now we have our view controller here, which we are thinking of as our view. We're going to also need to have a view model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Command and N, and I'm going to create a new Swift file, which I'm going to call LoginViewModel. Okay, so this is going to be our LoginViewModel. Now we have our LoginView controller, we have our LoginViewModel. What I like to do is I like to put both of them in a single group, just so both of them are grouped together. So and this I can call login, all right, or login view, if you will, since login view is in both the view and view model. So I'm just going to put that in here. So now we have our login view, and in our login view we have our login view controller. We also have our login view model. All right. Now for us to implement our login view model, I'm just going to create a class. And we can actually just make this final. So final class and final class login view model. Now, before we get into implementing the logic to our view model or our login view model, there's one thing we need to do. Now, if you remember from the diagram I mentioned, or the diagram I showed about the MVVM, we basically had a relationship between the view and the view model. And basically the way they communicated was through a binder, or basically the view model is able to make some changes and then broadcast some updates or notification to whoever is subscribed, right? So how do we do that here? Now binding can be implemented in different ways. In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to use a method that is very simple, and that's using an observable. Right? So we're going to create an ObservableObject class, and we're going to use that to basically send a notification whenever changes are made to a particular object or a particular attribute. Right? But apart from that, there's also something called an event bus. And for people who also like RX Swift, there's the RX Coco. And there's also combine, and actually combine is one method I would love to make a video about in the future. So maybe just let me know if it's something that you're interested in learning. But like I said, in this video we're going to be learning using a simple class that we're just going to create, an ObservableObject class. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to just take a break from here, the view model, and we're going to implement this ObservableObject class. And that's pretty simple to implement. We're going to create a new file, and this file we're going to call ObservableObject. Okay, so we're going to create that, and now we're going to create a class called ObservableObject. And now this class, we wanted to basically have or support different types. So we're going to put this a T in this angle brackets, all right? And actually, if you're not aware of what exactly is happening here, what we're doing is we're using something or a concept called generics, and I actually have a video on that. I'm going to leave that in the card right at the top. So if you don't understand how generics work, then feel free to just check out that video. I tried as much as possible to explain it as simply as possible. So yeah, that's what we're basically doing here. We want this to be able to support multiple types, so not just a single type. We want to support like integer, string, boolean, even custom structures. All right, so that's why we're using this. So we have that. The next thing, and we can actually just go ahead and make this final. Okay, good. So now we're gonna have a property here called value, and value is going to basically be of type T. So whatever the type is, or whatever the class type is, that's what this value T is going to be. Now I'm going to make this optional just in case, or just so that it supports nil values. So you could basically create an object and then pass a nil. Okay, so that's that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an initializer. And this initializer is going to take in the value. So the value is going to be of type optional T. Okay? So now we just say self.value. This is going to be equal to value. Pretty simple. Okay? So just like I mentioned, when someone or a particular observable object is going to be triggering a notification, you need to be listening. You need to be bound to that particular observable object so that you are aware whenever changes occur. So I'm going to give a real life example. Imagine that, okay, we have a television, right? And we have a station. In Nigeria, we have a station called like channels, or more popular, we have CNN, right? So CNN is a channel that displays news, okay? Now, if you don't have your television on, and if you are not subscribed to the CNN channel, even though news are going to be cast, you're not going to know, right? So if you are sitting in your living room and they just start publishing the news that there's a zombie apocalypse happening, you're not going to be aware. But if you are subscribed to the channel, or you are basically bound to that channel, to CNN, then when they like post the news or read the news that there's a zombie apocalypse, you are immediately going to be aware, and then you can just run out to the streets and pick your guns and knife, right? So that's basically what we're doing here. We have our value here, which is, you can think of as your news. Then we're going to create a function that allows other people to be able to listen to or subscribe to the news. So what we're going to do is we're just going to call this bind. All right, so we're going to call this bind, and when you're binding, we're going to pass in a listener. Oops, what did I do? So we're going to say listener, and this we're going to say escaping, and the value that we're going to be returning, because when we bind, we want to also basically send back the news that is within the channel. Okay, so just gonna put a T right there, and then we're gonna say void. So this is our closure that is basically going to inform whoever is subscribed that, or whoever is listening, that a particular change has happened. All right, so now that we have our listener, we're gonna have to create a private. We can create a private variable over here that we're gonna call listener, and this listener is going to be of type this. It's going to be of this particular type. Okay, so we're just going to copy this, and right here we're just going to paste this, and we're going to make this optional because initially it's going to be nil. All right, so this is going to be optional. So now that we have our bind method, what we want to do is basically set our listener to be whatever closure is passed in. So here we're going to say self dot listener is going to be equal to listener. All right, and the moment you bind, like the moment a user binds to this particular observable object, we can actually just trigger or just send a notification instantly. So the moment you subscribe to CNN, we just get the news the current news immediately. all right? Not waiting for a change. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to say listener, and then we're going to pass in value. That's it. Okay. Now, there's actually something we can do here to improve this, but I'm just going to leave it here just so things are basic. But basically what we can do here is we could make our listener to be an array instead of a single object. So now we have it as a single value or a single variable, meaning that one person can subscribe to that channel. But in the real sense, you can have multiple people subscribing to that. So you could have this as a listener and then make this an array like this. Okay, oops, not like that, like put it an array like this. All right, so but just for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to leave it as a listener like this. So just imagine that you're going to bind to the object and just going to have just one instance of the bind. But if you, of course, want me to go more in depth, feel free to just leave it in the comment section so I can, make an updated video. All right, so now we have created our observable object, and you can see how very simple this is. You can actually use this in many other projects you have, and of course you can decide to improve it as you will. Good, so now we have our observable object. What we're going to do now is we're going to head back to our login view controller, right in our login view, and now we're going to create an instance of our view model, because remember what I said, the view is aware of the view model, meaning it has direct contact with the view model. And the reason is because we need to be able to basically connect with the different attributes that are in the view model. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to say private let and view model, and this is going to be login view model. All right, very simple. So this is going to create an instance of our login view model. Login view mode, login view model, just like this. Beautiful. So now that we have this, what we're going to do next is, before we go into implementing the login feature on the view, or this login view controller, I want us to actually implement the logic in the back, or the business logic in the network part of things. Okay, so we're going to go over to our login view model. And before we actually do that, let's actually just create our network service. And this is going to be pretty similar to what we had in our last video. So just go ahead and create a network service. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to help us simulate a backend. All right, so like making a network request. All right, so we have our network service. And right here, we can just go ahead and create a final class called network service. And here, we're going to make this is I'll create a singleton here called static let shared, and this is going to be equal to network service. Then we're going to have a private init like this, so we don't create an instance of this. Then now we can create a function called login, because that's the first thing we want to do here, right? So this is going to have email of type string. We're going to have password of type string as well. Then finally, we're going to have a completion handler that is basically going to tell us when our login is successful. And here, we're going to just pass in a Boolean. So the Boolean is going to tell us true or false, depending on whether or not the login was successful. Great. Now, in order for us to simulate a network request, just like a delay, we're going to say dispatch queue.main.async after, and we're going to sync after a deadline of like 2 seconds. All right. Now after that, what we're going to do basically is we're going to check if email. Did I miss something here? Oops, I did. So I'm supposed to add completion like this. All right. So we're going to check if email is equal to test@test.com and password is equal to password. Oops. So if this is the case, what we want to do is just simply call our completion and pass in true. Otherwise, we're just going to call our completion and pass in false. Pretty straightforward, isn't it? Good. Now, apart from that, we are also going to have to create a user object here that's basically going to simulate our logged in user. All right. So this is going to be of type user, and we're going to make this optional because initially it's going to be no, because no user is logged in. All right. And let's see. So here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna say user is gonna be equal to user, and we need the object. And here we're gonna say first name as Emmanuel, last name is Aquara, email is gonna be test@test.com, age is gonna be 24, and yeah, that's it for this. So this is gonna be this, and here we're just gonna say user equals nil. Sweet. So this is going to simulate our login event, right? So this is like going to the backend. Now, just to make sure that there's no network leakages or whatever, even though we're using a singleton, we just add a weak self over here and put an in. And just like I said in the last video, I have a video explaining like what this is. So if you're not aware, then I'm going to leave a link to that as well so you can check it out, all right? So self like this. Good. Now we're gonna do basically implement the. Okay, let's hold off on that for now. Good. So this is our network service, and now that we have that, we can actually go to our login view model, and here we're going to implement a method to login. And here we're gonna say func login. Again, this is gonna take an email, but this time it's gonna be coming from our view, and then the password is gonna be coming from the view as well. This is going to be of type string. All right. So that's that. And right here, we can just use our network service.shared.login. And here we pass in email. Here we pass in password. And in our completion, we're going to have a success. And here we're just going to say weak self again. And finally, at this point, we want to basically check whether or not it was successful. And if it is successful, then we want to go to the next screen where we're going to display the welcome message. But if it is not successful, we want to display, basically just print an error message in the log, right? Now, but unlike the MVC, we cannot directly update our view, right? So remember, the view model is completely independent. It's not aware of anything that's happening in the view controller. It's not aware at all. It doesn't even know the type, right? So what we're going to do is right here, we're going to create a variable called error, and this error is going to be an observable object. So that's one difference that we need to note. So this is going to be an observable object, and the type is going to be string. Okay, so this error this error variable is going to basically have a value that is of an optional string, and this is an observable object. All right, now we're going to see how this works in a bit. So this is going to be equal to observable object, and then we can initialize this with nil. Very simple like that. So now that we have this, we've gotten our network response. All right, so what we can do is we can update our error message to basically hold an error message if the login was not successful. So how do we do that? We're just going to say self.error is going to be equal to, then now we're going to check if it is successful. So if it was successful, we're just going to pass nil, all right? So it means that there's no error, okay? But if it is not successful, we're going to pass in an error message and say invalid credentials. All right, very simple. So you can see we're making a network request, and based on the response we get, if it is successful, we're going to update our error message to say to have nil as no message, or an error message as a string. Now this isn't working because error is of type observable object. Now if you look at our observable object, you notice that we have something here called value, which is of the type that we need. So rather than trying to update this, rather than trying to update the error like this, we're going to be updating the value instead. Okay, so the value of this error message is going to be this, nil if it is successful, or invalid credentials if it is not. Now there's one thing that we forgot to do in our observable object class, and I'm just going to go over there, and can you imagine what that is? If we look here, we properly initialized, very good. We properly got access to our listener, which is very good. But we don't actually send a notification whenever changes occur. So if a change should happen to our value object, we don't know. So how do we do that? So we're just going to come over here and we're going to implement our didSet property. So whenever a value is set, we simply want to say listener, and this is optional, so listener and value. So what this is doing is whenever you the value of this changes, then it's going to just use our listener, or basically broadcast the notification using our listener. It's just going to broadcast it to whoever is listening. All right. So yeah, this was something that I missed. Good. So now let's get back here. So yeah, if it is successful, set the message, the error message to be nil. If it is not successful, then set the just set the error message to be invalid credentials. Great. So now we're done with the LoginViewModel. What we can do now is go over to our LoginView controller. And what we're going to do over here is whenever the login button is clicked, now for this video, I'm just going to completely disregard validations and all those things, just because that's not the scope of this study. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and use our view model. So now I'm going to say viewModel.login. And you can see that we've basically removed any kind of our business logic out of the view controller, and that is going to make this more cleaner. It's going to make it more specific to the view tasks which it should be executing, right? So for the email, we're just going to say email field.text. Password is going to be password field.text. Sweet. So this is going to perform the login. But now we've performed the login, and actually this is optional, so we're going to need to have both of them. We can just go ahead and use a guard. So guard let email be equal to email field.text. And we now have let password equals password field.text. And else we can say print, please enter email and password. Even though I know both of them are going to be there, I'm just doing this. Anyhow, so here we're just going to pass in email instead of email that, and password is going to be password. Good. So now when you click on the login button, it's going to use the view model to perform a login. But remember, the view model doesn't tell me directly, or doesn't update the view directly. So how is the view going to know that the view model has changed? That is very simple. What we're going to do here is we're going to create a func. So just create a private function here called setup binders. And basically what's going to happen in the binder is we're going to basically bind to whatever object we want to listen to, right? So bind to whatever channel, bind to CNN, bind to BBC, bind to whatever channel you want to listen for updates, right? So here I'm just going to say viewModel.error, which is basically what we want to listen to, right? So .error, and then dot, we're going to have a function called bind, right? So we're just going to say bind like that, and now we can just open our bracket like this. That is basically our completion that we're passing in. And here we're going to say weak self and here we can just have our error. Okay? So when we bind, we're basically subscribing to that particular channel. We're basically subscribing to the error attributes that is in our, what did I just do there? Our error attribute that is in our view model. So this error should be before like this, okay? So if we go ahead and look at the type over here, we're going to notice that the error is actually of type optional string, but this is optional, meaning that we have something not quite right. Now, if we go over to the error message or the error variable, over here we have this as an optional string, which is good. I want this. I want the error type to be an optional string. But it is returning double optional, meaning that if we go over to our observable object, right here, we're actually forcing or saying that every value must be optional. So what that means is if I don't want to have an optional string over here and I create an observable object, then this is going to return an optional error, right? So like if we go over to the login view controller, hold down Alt and click on this, you see that this is optional, but I don't want this. I want the type that I specify in my view model to always be the same as is in our observable object. So how do we do that? What we're going to do is go back here, and everywhere we have this optional, we're just going to remove that. So we don't want it to be an optional type by default. We want it to always be the exact type that was used to create the observable object. So I'm just going to go ahead and build this. And if you go back to the LoginViewModel, you're going to see that there's no error, meaning it's still good. So we are able to create a nil object because the type is an optional string. Now if we go back to our LoginViewModel, or view controller rather, and hold down option, click on this, you're going to notice that this is optional string. If we go to our LoginViewModel again, and this time I remove this and build, this is going to actually fail from here because it can be optional. It cannot be optional. So here, if I do this, you're going to see that it's just string. All right. So I hope this is you've learned something from my mistake over here. And then guys, I actually apologize. I'm shooting during the day, so there's a lot of noise. You know how Lagos is. So there's a lot of noise outside, so I apologize. Okay, good. So yeah, this is good. So let's build again, make sure everything is good. And now that that is okay, we can go back to our view controller. And here, what we want to do is, at this point, we're notified when the error value changes. So now we're just going to check if there's an error. So if that error is equal to error, oops. So if there's an error, then we're just going to print error. Otherwise, we're going to navigate to the logged in page. So we're going to say go to home page. And this is a function we're going to create right now. So private func go to home page. So here we're going to create a controller equals storyboard.instantiate view controller with identifier, and the identifier is going to be home view controller. We're going to copy this, paste this right here, and here we're going to say present, present, and we're presenting the controller animated true. We need no completion. So this is good. Now we have to make sure that we set up our binders. So right now, view.load, we're just going to say setup binders. Good. So this seems good. So let's actually just run this to make sure that everything works smoothly. Then I'm going to go over this one more time. So now I'm going to write the wrong email, wrong password. I'm going to click on login. After 2 seconds, we should see something here, which is wonderful. So now I'm going to put a valid email. So I'm going to say test@test.com, and password is going to be password. So I click on login, and after 2 seconds, it should bring up wonderful. Great. So now let me just do a very quick run through of our flow, just so that you understand exactly what is happening. So now over here we have our view, right? In our view, we created an instance of our view model. Okay. So after doing that, we had to set up our binders. So setting up a binder, you can think of as basically subscribing to a particular channel, so that whenever there's an update, you are aware. And since at this point you are aware, whenever a change occurs, you are able to basically update your UI and do whatever you want to do, considering the updated value. Okay. Now, again, the view controller doesn't, or the view model, which is what we have over here, does not directly update our view controller. Instead, what it does is we're able to modify a particular variable that the view controller is listening to, and then that variable just sends a broadcast whenever changes are made, right? And the observable object is what allows us to be able to send a broadcast to a particular listener. And again, this is something you can use in many other projects you have. And like I mentioned, there are different ways that we can do this. You can use RX Swift, you can use Combine, you can use the event bus, like different options. But this is very simple to use, and it doesn't require any third-party dependency. All right. So now that we have that done, we have our network request done over here, or at least a mock in our case. And when that is done, we simply just get a response, and we are able to update our variable, which is the one that the view controller is listening to. And when we do that, the view controller simply reacts. That's it. That's exactly how the view model works. You can see that it is pretty sweet. It's, at least the fact that it is a reactive kind of programming is pretty awesome. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run over to our home view controller, and we're going to implement the view model the MVVM design pattern to this particular page. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder, a new group, and this we're going to call Home View. All right. Now in our Home View, we're going to have the Home View controller. Again, we're going to have our Home View Model. All right. So now that we've created that, we can just go ahead and create a final class, if you will, and then this is going to be Home View Model, just like that. Then here, just like I mentioned, remember the view model is going to contain properties, attributes, and methods that are directly related to the view. So we don't bring whatever we don't need. So in our case, we're going to need, you can say we're going to need our first name, or we just say welcome message, right? We're going to need our welcome message. And this, normally we would have written as of type string, but since we're trying to make it an observable object, we're going to say that this is an observable object, and this observable object is going to be of type string. We can make it optional again, and this is going to be equal to observable object, and in bracket we can just pass a nil. All right. Awesome. So this is going to be our welcome message. Now what we can do is we can create a function here that says get logged in user. All right. Now this get logged in user is basically going to use our network service, and it's going to get the logged in user. But before then, we have to go into our network service, and we're going to implement the function to do that. So we're going to say func get logged in user, and this is going to return user, and here we already have user in this class. So, and this is actually public, so we could just directly access it, but I'm just going to make this private. And here we're simply going to return user. Now this is optional, so I'm just going to force this because I'm extremely lazy and I'm sure that it exists. Good. So now we can go back to our home view model, and right here we're able to just say .shared.get logged in user. Now this is going to return a user object, right? So I'm just going to say let user equals this. But now, just like I mentioned in the view model, we're not going to be working, the view isn't going to be working with the model directly. The only thing that is aware of the model is our view model. And the view model is going to basically expose what the view needs. And in our case, the only thing the view needs is the welcome message. Now the welcome message is composed of the first name and the last name from the user object, which is all we're going to be getting from here. So what we're going to do is we're going to say self.welcomeMessage.value, and this is going to be equal to a string. So this is going to be hello, and then we're going to say this and this, where the first bracket is going to be user.firstname, and this, the first name, and the second one is going to be user.lastname. Okay? So again, the view is absolutely not aware of the user model, okay? But it is aware of the view model, which is only what it needs. It only needs the welcome message. If we needed, for example, the first name, we could just add first name over here. And if you needed last name, we can add last name over here. And then here, we just say self.firstname equals user.firstname, and self.lastname equals user.lastname. All right? But in this case, it doesn't need them, so we don't talk about it. We don't just, yeah, that's it. All right, so that's basically what is happening over here. So here we've gotten our welcome message, and the idea is now that the welcome message has changed, it should trigger a notification, so whoever is subscribed is aware. So how do we subscribe? Again, just go over to your view controller. Let's actually get rid of all of these necessities. And at the top, we're going to create a reference to our view model. So view model is going to be equal to our home view model. And here, we're simply going to say view model dot get logged in user. All right. So now that we've gotten the logged in user, we know that this is is very fast. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to say welcome label.text, or actually, so now that we've gotten the logged in user, remember when you are trying to, if you want to be aware of changes, you have to subscribe. So it's something you always have to remember. So here, we're going to create a private func and say setup binders. And this setup binders is going to be binding what? So we want to simply listen to changes on our welcome message. So the welcome message, and we're going to say .bind, and we can just open our curly braces over there, add weak self in, and this actually gives us, remember, because we, in our completion, we always pass in the value, like we always send back the value that was updated. So we can actually just fix that and put, no, actually not there, it should be after the weak self. So we can just say message over here, and here we can simply just say welcome label dot text, oops, equals message. Awesome. So now we're going to set up our binder, set up binders. So we're going to set up our binders before we actually get our logged in user. So this guy's going to be aware. So now let's go ahead and run this. And okay, I missed something over here. So just weak self. So you have to say optional self. And we're going to run this. So what we expect is when we log in successfully, so test at test.com and password. When we log in successfully and go to the next, we should see hello Emmanuel Acquara. So I'm going to click on login. After 2 seconds, it comes over here and we have hello Emmanuel Acquara. So that's basically how the Model View ViewModel works. It's pretty, I personally like it, because especially for the fact that it reacts, right? It doesn't, you don't have to directly be aware of changes or whatever is happening in the view controller. This guy is completely independent, and because of that, you can like test this guy very well. You can test it very easily. So yeah, that's actually it for Model View MVVM for short. And if you have questions, by all means, go ahead, ask in the comment section. And I'm actually going to be working on a new project, and I'm thinking that's going to be a next year project, I guess. And that I'm going to build with MVVM. All right. So in the project we built earlier this year, the Yummy Food Ordering application, we use the MVC. And in the next one I'm going to be building next year, we're going to be using the MVVM. So if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and smash the subscribe button, click on the little bell so that you are notified immediately my new videos are up. So, you know, just subscribe to it, bind, right? So yeah, that's it. And you guys have an amazing week. Bye-bye.